Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. I was reflecting on why we organised today's event. At the George Alexander Foundation, we hope to support our community, not just through your scholarship funds, but in helping you gain skills and capabilities to succeed while at the same time maintaining your well-being. So we hope today's seminar will start a conversation about finance and arm you with knowledge and tools to give you the confidence and ability to manage your money. We know that Zoom events can't replace the value of in-person, face-to-face meetings, but we have embraced the additional opportunities virtual gatherings have offered us to connect GAF scholars all around the country on themes that we hope are relevant to you. Perhaps there will be just one tip or thought that you take away from today's event that gets you thinking about your financial security and future prosperity. So before we begin, I'll go over some housekeeping and a brief outline of today's event. Craig will speak first because he loves talking figures and finance. Some of his favourite words that he uses a lot are corpus, fiscal, distributions, etc. But I guess this is a large part of his job, so he knows and loves this stuff. Craig will be followed by our first breakout room session for you to get to introduce yourselves and flag any financial issues or concerns you have with each other. You can be as open and frank as you feel comfortable in these sessions. And remember that while it can be intimidating to speak in a big or even a small group of people you don't know that well, this is a safe space and we respect and value all your contributions. We'll be joined around 12:30 by our guest speaker, Dr. Jim Chalmers. He'll speak for approximately 20 minutes and we'll have time for a brief Q&A. So do make note if you have any questions you want to ask while he is with us. When Jim leaves, we'll have another breakout session to reflect on any takeaways for you from today's event and give you the opportunity to connect more with GAF scholars from around the country. We'll conclude on some reflections. At any time, make use of the Zoom functions to share your thoughts. You can use the raise hand function to signal if you have something to contribute, and feel free to use the chat function as well. If you want to just observe today too, then that's totally fine. There's no pressure on anyone to speak or contribute if they don't feel comfortable. I'll quickly introduce you to the team before we kick off proceedings. As you may already know who we are from previous episodes of the GAF Zoom series. My name is Mairead Phillips. I'm the Program Manager of all the Scholarship and Fellowship programs. I'm inspired every day I get to read your applications, follow your progress via your annual reports and event catch-ups, which we do hope will one day be in person soon. Orchestrating our social media, newsletters and events is Nina Beer, our amazing Communications Officer. And last but by no means least, our esteemed CEO and first speaker today, Craig Connelly.
Thanks, Mairead. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us in this session. Just by way of background, prior to becoming CEO of the Potter Foundation, which I did back in October 2015, I am a chartered accountant by training, so I worked at Pricewaterhouse back in the 80s, so a long time ago. I was a partner at a firm called JB Weir, which became Goldman Sachs JB Weir here in Australia. So Goldman's bought Weir's out. At the time, I was head of research at Goldman's. I then left and started my own hedge fund. So I managed an Australian Aussie equities long-short investment fund for 7 years and sold that in 2012. So I've got a lot of experience managing investments and I have my own portfolio now that is managed through an external firm, and I am a complete non-believer in cryptocurrencies for what it's worth. Don't understand them, and I'll talk about those in a moment as well. I'm sure I might get some questions from people also. And I gave you that background because I used to have an Australian financial services licence, so I understand the significance of providing advice or not providing advice. And in the context of today's session, just to be clear, I'm not providing any financial advice. I'm just wanting to give you tips based on my journey, both personally and professionally, over my 55 odd years. So the first thing to highlight is that everybody's circumstances are different. And I understand that. We've got about 24, 25 of you on the call today, and you all will have a different perspective on money and finance. Some of you will be immersed in it. Some of you won't have had any discussions with your family about it. And so understand there is no right and wrong answer, and there is no stupid question to ask as well. Everyone's journey over their lifetime is different. When my wife and I bought our first house after we were first married, the interest rate we were paying on our mortgage shot up to 19.25%. Interest rates on mortgages today are anywhere between sort of 2.8 to 4.5%. So if you can imagine paying an interest rate of nearly 20% on your mortgage, that's happened in my lifetime. Financial circumstances can change dramatically for all of you, and will do over your own personal journey. And so the most important thing I think for any of you to take from today is that you are just starting to think about your finances. Now, as GAF scholars, you're getting a chunk of cash through the university from GAF. It's $7,000 to $8,000 a year, whatever it is that you get, depending on whether you're a 3 or a 4 year undergraduate. And you're already benefiting from that inflow of money, and probably some of you are thinking about how do you spend that money. So you spend it on rent, you spend it on food, whatever it might be. The purpose of this session is to expand your horizons beyond sort of the 3 to 4 year lifetime of your GAF involvement, to think about how you should think about finances yourselves personally. I've got, well, financial big five is the heading that's been put on here by Mairead and Nina. I don't know if I'd call that, but what I can share with you is, as I said before, I'm 55 years old. I've been married for nearly 32 years. So my wife and I got married quite young. Got 3 adult children. They're all educated, gone through university, yada, yada. I still have a budget. I've had a budget for the entire period of our married life. I don't account for every dollar and cent, but we have significant buckets that we use to manage our lives, if you like. It used to be mortgage payment. It used to be school fees. It's money for going out on the weekend. It's money for holidays. It's money for savings. And the amount of money we might allocate to various items that we were budgeting for changes a lot over our journey as our life circumstances change. But you would think, as a 55-year-old, I'm mortgage free. I don't have any dependents. I'm working. My wife has recently stopped working. Why do we still need a budget? One, because I'm a chartered accountant and I like doing spreadsheets, but 2, because it still allows you to plan for different things that you might want to do in your life. So if we want to travel for 3 months, and we're allowed to again, to visit my son who lives in the US, I want to make sure that we have got adequate money put aside for whatever it is we want to do for those 3 months while we're traveling through the US, for example. So we budget for that. So budgeting as a discipline just allows you to maximize whatever resources are available to you. And so this is the first point I want to make, is whether you earn $20,000 or $10,000 or $500,000 or whatever it is you might earn at different parts of your professional career over your lifetime, that's money you earn, and it's your money, and you've worked hard to earn it. And so you should really value it, and you should get the most out of it. And budgeting has allowed me and my wife and my family to do that over our journey. So it's actually really an important discipline. And you can then take that and dial it up and dial it down as much as you want. But I think having a budget that allows you to maximize whatever it is you want to do in your life and afford to do whatever you want to do is a good discipline to think about. The second is superannuation. So my 3 kids are 29, 28 and 26. I was talking to my 26-year-old a few weeks ago. He's working in he's a production operator or production director at an advertising firm here in Melbourne. He's got $23,000 in super. And he just said to me, Dad, is that a lot or not for me at this age? And I actually sat down and guess what? I prepared him a spreadsheet. And I said, listen, your super balance today at 23 grand, by the time you're 65, if you add no more money to it, is going to be worth close to $250,000. And I showed him sort of the benefit of compounding over that time. If you then add to that, as he will over his professional life, it'll be worth a lot more than that. And it depends on the returns you impute and all sorts of things. But the key point there is the compulsory super did not become a thing for me professionally until I was in my 30s. Compulsory super exists today for you guys, and someone in their 20s contributing to a super fund for 40 to 45 years gets the benefit of compounding over that time, and it is really important. So maximise your contributions to superannuation as much as you can, because it's also the most tax effective environment for you to accumulate investments in as well. You can have investments outside of super, but as a young person, you won't have a lot of disposable income available to them. Superannuation is your most tax effective savings vehicle that you can put money into. That's the second point. The third point is saving. Give yourself permission to enjoy your life. So, whether it's 5% of what you earn, 10% of what you earn, give yourself permission to aspire to a great holiday or to buy the latest electronic device or clothes or whatever it is that's important to you. But make sure in your budgeting, again, personal experience, that you have money in there for you to live your life and really enjoy your life and have experiences as well. It's really important. You give yourself permission to enjoy whatever it is that you earn over your professional life. The fourth is investing. So this is different to super. It's investing outside of super. I have a family trust. I've got two sort of corporate entities that sit under the family trust. And so I've got investments in both of those, both in Australia and overseas as well. And as you get older and you might have access to available funds to invest, or even as a young person, it does make sense to think about accumulating an investment nest egg outside of super, but only if you are not paying a mortgage. If you are paying a mortgage, again, my advice, and I'm not giving financial advice, just my experience, is pay it down as quickly as you can, because all mortgage repayments are paid out of after-tax dollars, out of your income. You've already paid tax on it. So to get an investment return equivalent to paying down a mortgage, you need to gross up for tax. In the current environment, it's hard to get sustainable investment returns much above the pre-tax cost of servicing a house mortgage. So if you are looking at buying a property and one that you live in, I'd be paying that down before I was allocating any money to other investing. And the fifth point, and I've already made this to a certain extent because I'm running out of time, but the fifth point is be kind and generous to yourself, which is a point I made earlier. Allocate money in your budget to yourself to do whatever it is that's important to you. And then 5A under that is give to charity. So community is important. Charitable giving at a young age establishes, I think, a really good perspective. And I think all of you would have a good perspective because GAF scholars, my experience is you're very high quality people. But just to say it explicitly, that supporting a charity of your choice over a lifetime is an invaluable thing to do and an important contribution to make. Now, my session was due to stop at 12:20. It's 12:19 on my clock, so Murad, I'm going to stop there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Craig. I'm going to hand over to Nina.
Yeah, so before I put us into breakout rooms to discuss what Craig's spoken about, does anyone have any burning questions?
And please ask why I don't like cryptocurrencies if you want to as well. Happy to.
I asked Craig this the other day because I'm confused about them as well, but I think a lot of younger people are getting into them. But doesn't make any sense to me either.
So again, just a lesson that I've learnt. I had one significant investment that I made in my mid-30s and lost a lot. Like it was a lot of cash and I lost a lot. And in hindsight, the reason why that investment went belly up for me was because I didn't understand what I was investing in. I don't understand cryptocurrencies. I understand they're created effectively by a truckload of server capacity. So they're created online. They're one of the biggest environmental footprints now on the planet, is the energy consumption creating cryptocurrencies, which is an interesting issue. And so that's not a good thing. But I understand cryptocurrencies, the pricing of them is driven by supply and demand. But they're not backed by a fiat currency, which is backed by a major country or economy. And interestingly, the value of cryptocurrencies is always expressed in US dollars. It comes back to currencies that you can actually use things to buy and sell with. And I just don't understand them. I wouldn't invest in them. It's as simple as that.
Craig, Raf made a comment in the chat about super. He said, check you're invested in high growth options if you're comfortable with the risk, as it's usually seen as a better option for young people.
So Raf, I would agree, and I would remove your caveat actually. There's no risk in a high growth option because in my opinion, actually the stats support that statement. Over the long term, equities is the best performing asset class. And so having a high growth option through your super fund, which is ungeared, there's no risk other than equity market volatility. And given you're investing over a 40, 50 year time frame, I'd take that risk every day of the week. But you're right, that's a great point. High growth options for sure.
Did you want to add something? Yeah.
Unmute yourself, Raf. Just ask the question.
Sorry, I thought I had to ask for permission to be unmuted.
No, that's right.
I really appreciate my comments being read out because I think it's really valuable. I'm a strong believer in super.
Yep.
And just the reason I made that comment is because a lot of people, when they open their super account, they get automatically put into the balanced fund, which is not really appropriate for like young people. And wanted to add too that super co-contributions could be worth looking into. Obviously not financial advice. I'm not giving that out either. But the government offers, the government contributes up to $500 for people on a lower income tax bracket when you make your own contributions into your super. So I definitely think that's worth looking into for anyone who wants to build up that strong base for retirement. Some
free money.
Yep.
And Raf, just to be clear as well, I'm still in a high growth option in my super fund. Self-managed, but still high growth. Nick has his hand up.
Sorry, just turning my camera on. Thanks for organising. Firstly, really valuable telecon to share with everybody. My question was with regards to different types of super funds, and I may be getting the terminology wrong, but funds that are, say, for the members versus corporate funds, and then any comments around funds that have low fees that are part of those funds that have lower management, whether you have any advice on how they perform in the long run.
So so I can't give you any advice on that. What I can tell you is the federal government actually passed legislation literally in the last day, as I understand, which will introduce effectively a rating system for super funds, and super funds will be required to report to members on their performance, and that information is going to be publicly available. You could already Google top performing industry super funds, for example. And the industry super funds, as I understand it, generally operate for the benefit of their members. So my wife was previously invested in an industry super fund, and I rolled her fund into our self-managed super fund. For anyone with less than $250,000 in super, my advice is they should be in a low fee industry super fund because the compliance and other costs of running a self-managed super fund, it's just uneconomic to do that below $250,000, roughly. So all I'd say to you is try and get the best of both worlds, which is lowest fees possible with good performance numbers, and look for those performance numbers over periods beyond 5 to 7 years.
Thanks for that.
That's right.
Great. I'll now put us into breakout rooms so you can discuss these topics amongst yourself further. And before I do that, I'll just flag some of the questions that I'll send through as icebreakers. So one of them is, do you have any short-term or long-term financial goals already that you're saving for or want to achieve? Who do you speak to about your finances at the moment? And do you think that'll change because of this event? And are there any podcasts or books, financial resources that you look at and that you recommend for other scholars or alumni in the GAF community? So I'm going to open the breakout rooms now. And if you just hit the button so you can join it, you'll be sent straight through. Everyone's back from the breakout rooms now. Welcome back, everyone.
Craig, we'll get you to kick off the next session.
Great, thank you. And Jim, thanks for coming online, and thanks for everyone for coming back out of those breakout rooms. So we've been joined by Dr. Jim Chalmers. Jim is a Labor MP and he's the current Shadow Treasurer, and he's joining us from his home in Queensland. And Jim, the various positions that Jim's held in the Shadow Cabinet include Shadow Minister for Finance, the Shadow Minister for Financial Services and Superannuation, Shadow Minister for Sport, and Shadow Assistant Minister for Trade, Investment and Productivity. Jim's also a Griffith University alumnus and has published 2 books. In Glory Days, which is one of the books you must have written, Jim, I take it, Jim asks why Australia, as a nation with one of the world's best economies, has such a dim view of its own performance. And in Changing Jobs, the Fair Go and the New Machine Age, Jim and Mike Quigley look at the changing landscape of work for young Australians and what it will mean for equality in this country as well. So he's actually well placed to answer any curly questions you can throw his way. I believe on the agenda, Jim is going to speak to us for about 20 minutes or so. So it's my pleasure to hand over to Dr. Jim Chalmers. Jim, over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks very much, Craig. I'm pleased to see that we got the memo. We're dressed identically, I can see from.
Indeed.
Look, thanks for the invitation, Craig, and for the introduction. Thanks to Mairead as well and Nina for getting us all together. I've been looking forward to a chat today. I'm coming to you from Logan City, just south of Brisbane, in the great state of Queensland, from the traditional lands of the Yugambeh and the Yuggera people. So I wanted to acknowledge them. I also come to you as Craig said, as a graduate of Griffith University, but also the ANU in Canberra. So I think you've got relationships with both of those really terrific universities. So g'day everyone. It's a good time to have this conversation about financial literacy, but also young people more broadly, and some of the other issues that you might want to ask me questions about. I'm not sure I'll go for the whole 20 minutes. I might try and be a little bit shorter than that, and then hopefully that gives us an opportunity for an extra question or two. In terms of my experience at university, I was very fortunate to go to Griffith University, as I said, just up the road from here in Brisbane, and to the ANU later on. So I spent about 7 years all told in the university system. And I'm not telling any of you anything you don't know when I say it is extremely difficult financially, even for 3 years, but certainly for 7 years, to try and make ends meet and to try and get a good start to finances when the various allowances, even good scholarships like the ones that you're on, it's still quite tough to make ends meet and make sure that you still got all the time you need to study, social life, keep fit and healthy, but also put food on the table. So really just to begin by acknowledging that. It's been a little while since I've been at university now, but I still have very, very strong memories of how difficult that kind of juggle is. And I'll come back to some of those issues in a moment. I think to begin kind of quite broadly, it's a difficult time to be a university student in this country. Again, you know this better than anyone, but the combination of the pandemic and the recession, the combination of how much harder it is to get the full university experience, being kept largely off campus for much of last year, all the difficulties with online learning, all of the issues around missing out some of that social capital and social interaction. Obviously, that makes what is already pretty difficult to get a good degree it makes it that much more difficult. So we want to make sure that people hang in and kind of stay the course and finish the course. What worries us about recessions like the one that we've just been through is that often it's young people who are the last to kind of recover from it, not just in the university system in particular, but we know from most recessions throughout history that when the economy turns down really seriously, as it did for us last year, then often as it starts to recover, it's young people that find it hardest to get back into work or to get back on their feet financially. And so even as there have been some pretty good developments in the economy the last few months coming out of the recession, we still need to be really conscious that our task is to make sure that people aren't left behind. And that means our task principally is to ensure that young people aren't left behind. You already know that unemployment amongst young people is much higher than it is among the general population. Some of the issues around job insecurity, casualisation, underemployment, exploitation, wage theft, superannuation theft, all of these sorts of issues are far more acute amongst young people than they are in the broader population. And so what that creates is a whole bunch of cost of living pressures on young people. And what we try and do, I'm in the Labor Party in the National Parliament. What we try and do is we work out what our policies are, but also what our views are on the government's policies, is to try and make things better for you in terms of financial pressures, or at the very least try to make sure that the government isn't making things harder and making things worse for you. I won't give a kind of a big political rant right now. You're probably not in the mood for that, and I'm not really in the mood for it, having been in Canberra and question time all week. But really on that front, there have been some developments which have been concerning to us around the way that JobKeeper was withdrawn, some of the other issues around payments and allowances, some of the issues around the cost of a degree. All of these sorts of things combined, in our view, make it harder to be a student and a young person in this country. And so we've had a view about that. But beyond that, we would like to see more investment in universities. We would like to see some of these cost of living pressures addressed. I think one of the reasons why young people often get kind of a rough trot in the economy and in the financial system is because when it comes to some of these issues, quite frequently young people are ignored. And I think one of the reasons for that is that collectively the political system of which I'm a part does not do a good enough job trying to speak with you and understand your concerns and pressures. That's why I'm pleased to be here today, but also I had some meetings during the week with the Foundation for Young Australians and some other groups to try and get my head around all these sorts of issues. But the other reason why I think young people are often ignored in the economy and in the national conversation about budgets and finances is that financial literacy amongst young people is really extraordinarily and quite worryingly low. There was a study by the Financial Basics Foundation 2 years ago which said that less than 1 in 4 young people under 25 have a basic level of financial literacy. There's another survey which found obviously that people under 25 are the least financially literate. The financial regulators did a survey that said that far too few young people know enough about the superannuation system or even enough about their own superannuation balance if they have one. The youth employment study last year, I think, during COVID, only said that 1/3 of young people felt hopeful about their financial situation. Last year, 14% of young people said they'd run out of food, 21% said they'd skipped meals. And so all of this together, I could go on and on about all these different surveys and all these different understandings that we have about financial literacy and cost of living pressure on young people. But I think you understand that one of the issues here is, a lack of information about how to best manage your finances, what sorts of things you need to be thinking about now to make sure as you work your way through university and as part of the and being supported by the foundation, what can you be doing to make sure that your finances are in as good a shape as possible, and that you are servicing everything you need, but also have the capacity to have a good, fulfilling university experience as well, which is really important. I'm looking forward to the discussion, but I think just to put a couple of ideas on the table that you might have a view on, or maybe you've got other suggestions, but I think there are kind of 3 keys in terms of tips for you as you think about managing your finances through university and beyond that as younger Australians. And I kind of divide it up into 3 categories. I think first one is plan, and I'll come back to it. The second one is ask. And the third one is intervene or change. And I'll just briefly touch on each of those 3. I think firstly, when it comes to planning, there is actually a lot of tools to help you, work out how you can make the most of your finances. But really, I think at the broadest level, planning is about doing a grocery shop that doesn't mean you're going to more expensive places every day to top up on groceries, that you put some planning into your needs for the week, and you're putting some planning into where you can get that at the least cost. Obviously, planning around budgets and social activities and regular spending like gym memberships and the like, which are really important, making sure that you factor all of that in. Some kind of a sense, not some detailed spreadsheet, but some sort of idea of what you've got coming in and what you've got going out, and what the various opportunity costs are of spending on something rather than another thing. I think planning is really important. That brings me to the second category, which is about asking. And what I mean by asking is there is actually a lot of services available at universities, student unions and other parts of the student administration. They can often help you access, cheaper fares or cheaper healthcare, cheaper medicine. Certain banks will provide accounts with no fees. They'll help in terms of auto payments and the like, and that's part of planning too. So plan and ask. And then the third thing is really about intervening or changing your behaviour when you know there's a problem. And there's a couple of different ways to think about that. This is the thing that I reckon I kind of got wrong when I was on a fairly modest scholarship at the ANU, and before that, working six days or nights a week and getting through university. I didn't have access to any payments or anything, and so I had to work 6 days a week. And the thing that I really wish I'd done differently is when you know that your finances are heading south, when you're starting to accumulate credit card debt, which is uncomfortable, or maybe the kind of afterpays of the world or whatever it might be, is really having the ability to understand early enough when things are not good, to intervene and to change your budget, to change your plan, to change the way that you're going about things. And I know from my own experience with young people I work with and in my community that this is the thing that often goes wrong. Often we wait until things are incredibly dire. You can't feed yourself, you can't service your bills, you can't keep power on before we ask for help, or we try and intervene or change, whether it's more hours at work or something else, or some change in our spending patterns. And so my third bit of advice is really when things start to go crook, when they're heading in that direction, try and intervene sooner rather than later. There are all kinds of helplines. There's a national debt helpline. There's other ways you can deal with things when things get really out of control and really crazy, but to try and spot that issue before it's too bad, and so you can make the necessary changes. No doubt you've heard about other tips, Craig and Mairead and Nina, and part of the discussion obviously you would have been talking about some of these sorts of strategies and tips, but those are the sorts of ones that come immediately to mind for me. But happy, Craig, to have a conversation to hear what people think, or hear if they've got any other questions that I might be able to try and answer.
Well, Jim, the most important message I took out of that was you didn't say anything that would embarrass what I said before, so I'm pleased with that. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
That's great. You added a lot of value, though, the asking and the intervening, changing. Some really good insights, I think, and I agree wholeheartedly, invaluable. Mairead, I'm going to throw it back to you to manage Q&A. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. So If anyone would like to ask a question, please just feel free to jump in. You can raise your hand if you prefer, or if you want to pop a question in the chat. I think we've got, Bob's got his hand up. So Bob, did you want to unmute yourself? And yeah, great. Hi.
Hi there, Jim.
Bob.
So in your presentation, you kind of talked a lot about kind of personal finance, and that was quite helpful. I was wondering, so I was personally interested in like entrepreneurship. Would you have any kind of advice for young people that are looking to kind of head in that direction?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Bob. Look, I think the key there is obviously the kind of online piece. You know, the most of the kind of youngish entrepreneurs that I mix with, the difference between the ones that succeed and the ones that don't is really about their kind of online presence. I think particularly in COVID and its aftermath, you know, if I was trying to set something up and get it going now, I really think that that's where I put most of my attention. Also the kind of mentoring piece, you know, find someone who's been through the kinds of trials and tribulations of getting something started from scratch, and trying to make sure you don't have to kind of relearn everybody else's mistakes. There are good groups and organisations in local communities often, whether it's the Chambers of Commerce, though they can be a bit stuffy sometimes, but there are often groups that you can talk to where you can quite easily find, you know, a good, relevant mentor to help you with some of the challenges, so that you're not, you know, struggling over obstacles unnecessarily. But I think the online piece is just absolutely crucial.
All right, thank you.
I'd love to also point out before we go on, like the parallels of intervening until it becomes too late with financial health as well as mental health. I think is really, you know, there's a lot of parallels with that. So thanks for pointing that out. And I wanted to ask about, you touched on opportunity costs. Would you just explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. Yeah, so opportunity cost is the kind of, you know, egghead term for when you spend on something, it means you can't spend that same dollar on something else. And the one that I kind of think about from my time as a student was, you know, you have there's lots of different ways to have a really good kind of social life. My social life involved lots of the pub. And I think now about, you know, in hindsight, you think, oh, I couldn't afford, you know, like a gym membership and all these sorts of things, but it wouldn't have been that hard for me to change, you know, to have a cheaper social life and invest more in my own kind of health, you know, at the time. And I think the point you just made, Nina, about the mental health intervention is really important when you think about where physical health and mental health crosses over as well. You know, I discovered kind of heavy routine exercise kind of later on, and I wish I discovered it much earlier. And I think a lot of people, when they look at their budget and they try and come up with a good plan, one of the big pieces of spending that they're worried about, which becomes kind of discretionary, is the spending on their own health. You know, gym memberships, or, you know, social netball or social touch footy or whatever it might be. And so the opportunity cost there is, you know, maybe you don't need 4 nights at the pub, maybe you need 2 nights at the pub, and that means that you can afford, you know, gym memberships, which are relatively expensive but really beneficial in terms of your physical health, but also your mental health.
Great. Did anyone else have any other questions they'd like to put to Jim while we have him here?
Jim, it's Craig here. I might ask a question which extends on some of the questions asked when I spoke earlier to the group before you joined us. They were asking about low-fee super funds and what they should think about in terms of checking out performance of funds and those they might choose. I mentioned sort of low-fee industry super funds that generate reasonable returns, but I also referenced legislative change or new legislation that was passed in the last 24, 48 hours, which I'm sure you will be across far better than me. Are there any relevant points in that might be worthwhile sharing with the group?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree, you know, there are some really good funds, typically industry funds, but there are some really good funds with good returns. And superannuation is one of those things when you're 20 or 25, it's hard to really get your head around how much it matters. But the earlier you start in the superannuation system with compounding interest and all the rest of it, it makes a huge difference to the quality of your retirement. And it is hard to think, 40 years down the track, I accept and understand that. But every dollar that you waste on unnecessary fees, where you might have multiple accounts paying fees on all the accounts, or you're paying for things you don't need, or you're in the wrong investment strategy, that can literally mean $200,000 or $300,000 difference by the time you retire. And so really encourage you to kind of take an interest in your superannuation, and make sure it's better if you don't have kind of 4 different funds from 4 different jobs that you had. You want to consolidate those on the MyGov website. That makes a huge difference in terms of fees. And you want to make sure you're choosing the right investment strategies. A lot of superannuation funds will let you choose different levels of risk. As Craig wouldn't have given you financial advice, and I don't want to do that either, but your fund will probably tell you that the further you are from retirement, the more ambitious you can be about how much risk you take on. It's usually the most conservative time in your investment profile is usually when you're kind of in your 50s and you don't want to risk your balance. But that's a conversation you should have with the fund, but it's one of the relevant considerations. There are 2 big changes coming down the path which have massive implications for young people in super. And Craig, you mentioned the one that passed last night actually in the Parliament. And that's the one which is about, it's called stapling, which is a kind of a weird term which says when you have a fund, you get into a fund and you take that fund with you. It's like the fund is stapled to you when you go to new jobs, which is one way of minimising the amount of accounts that you have. So you're not setting up a new account at every different job. And so we understand why that could be important. But one of the things you need to be really careful about is if you've got a fund which is not a great fund compared to others, you do have the capacity to change out of that fund. You don't have to be stapled forever in every situation. And so get some good advice from someone you trust about whether or not you're in a good or bad fund. And if you're stapled to a bad fund, find a way to get out of it over time, not today. These changes don't come in for a few months now. But that's one thing to keep an eye out for, and people will be able to advise you on that. The second change, which is a really, really good change, that I'm not in the government, I'm in the opposition, but they made a really good change that we really, really support. It's our policy too, which is it used to be that if you made less than $450 a month, you didn't get super, which is a kind of a remnant of when people used to get paid in cash in pay packets, and it was a big compliance burden to pay superannuation. But now that it's electronic and now that there's single touch payroll and all these sorts of things, it makes no sense to have that limit. So now, and many of you have been in this position, if you're making $110 a week or less, you're going to be getting super when the laws change. So that's a good thing as well. So there's been a couple of changes. One's very good, one we got to keep an eye out for.
I think
Thanks,
I was
Jim.
in
That's
my
super helpful.
I was in my early 20s when compulsory super just came in, and I remember at one time having about 10 super funds.
Yeah. And you would have been paying.
It was out of
fees on all
control.
that
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just didn't think about it at all in my 20s. So yes.
Yeah.
Without giving advice, and I did discuss super before, but I really want to reiterate and emphasise Jim's reference to super, and it's consistent with a comment I made earlier. If you have interest in superannuation today as a young person and you set yourself up right, when you're my age, in your mid-50s, you will be so pleased. So advice from 30 plus years down your own life journey, I think heed that advice. It's really good advice.
Yeah, be good to your future self.
Well put.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions from the group, we might let Jim go. I'm sure he's got lots on today, or maybe he's just relaxing after returning from Canberra.
I'm off to it's the sports day at my local special school, about 300 metres up the road here. So I'm off to present some trophies.
Oh, fantastic.
Jim, thanks for taking the time. Really do appreciate it. That was awesome.
I appreciate it. Thanks very much, everyone. Nice. Thanks to chat.
Thanks, Jim.
All right.
So after that discussion, I'd love to pop you in another set of breakout rooms for you to discuss. I'll just open them up now, and perhaps you could discuss if there are any burning things that you want to do after today's session, or anything else that's been brought up by the conversation. I'll just open the rooms now. So everyone's back now. Did anyone have any key takeaways that they'd like to share with the rest of the group if they're comfortable with doing so? If you do, just put your little Zoom hand up and we can go from person to person.
Foster.
So in our breakout room, we one of our members was promoting the Barefoot Investor as a resource that they're using a little bit, and a few of our members had heard of it and hadn't really pursued that as a concept. So that was a bit of a suggestion that we heard about.
Hey Foster, it's Craig here. Last year, my wife came into some cash, a decent amount of cash. And I got her to read 2 Barefoot Investor articles because she's not familiar with investment markets. She wanted to put it in the bank, and I said, no. I said, banks, you're going to be earning less than 1% of interest. Put it in the markets, but she wouldn't listen to my specific advice, which is smart actually and fine. And I mean that when I say that's smart. She needs to make up her own decision and not be influenced by me. And on the back of reading the Barefoot Investor article, she's now got a Barefoot Investor portfolio. That's what she uses. So I'd agree with that. It's a great suggestion.
Fantastic. Craig mentioned about having a budget for all of his adult life. I'm in my 40s and I only just started budgeting last year, I think. So I'm very late to the party, but an app I use to do that is called You Need a Budget. And it's been like a game changer for me. So I'm just sharing that, not as advice or anything like that, but it's been a great app for me to help me understand how important budgeting is and spending to a budget rather than to your bank balance. Did anyone else want to share any kind of collective thoughts from their group? Yeah, Raf.
Yeah, thank you. So we were in our group, we were talking a lot again about super because it seemed to be the main theme here. And one of our members has to like pay their own super, and so has to like really take control of that. And what I thought was quite valuable was like when you do your own research into these things, when you pick your super fund, when you pick how you're invested, that really makes you more motivated to actually pay money in. And so once you engage yourself in this process, it becomes something actually rewarding and something that you've chosen to do, rather than something that you have to do and then you begrudge the amount of money you have to put aside. So it was more of like a mentality thing and taking ownership of this, which I thought was really valuable.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, are there any other final thoughts anyone wanted to share just before we sign off today? No, well, thank you all for coming. It was really great to have you here and to share this experience. We really appreciate it. As much as we love in-person events, these kind of Zoom get-togethers give us a chance to stay connected, especially as the pandemic obviously is still in full force at the moment. So we look forward to maybe seeing you at the next one or at an in-person event if we're lucky enough to get there in the second half of this year. And we really hope you're going well with your studies as well, or whatever stage you're at.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.